Hello, everyone. I'm Jamin Shively, broadcasting from Seattle, Washington, and I'm here with my colleague and co-host, Michael. How you doing, Michael?
Doing well, Jamin. Here in the south of France.
Wonderful. Great to see you. So the topic for this particular series of conversations is people. So this builds off of the topic of the whole world a teleological taxonomy, where we distinguish that whole world has two major sub-branches: people and the planet. So now we're zeroing in on that main sub-branch of the teleological taxonomy, which is people.
Let's get into it.
All right. So the first thing that comes to mind is looking at it from the standpoint of needs. What are all the needs that people have? And before even delving into that, there's other kind of ways that we could, perspectives on people. You could say, well, what are all the problems that people have? And that's very closely associated with need. The problem of hunger is precisely the fact that we're not fulfilling the need for food of many people. Simple as that. So needs, problems kind of go hand in hand. Looking at needs and problems, and we're kind of looking at the glass half empty. Another whole perspective is, what are all the assets? What are all the human assets, the people related assets, or assets that support people? I'm just saying there's lots of different ways that we could take an approach.
Lots of ways, yeah.
Right. So I just want to be clear that we're taking one. If we start with needs, for example, there's nothing like perfect about that approach or superior about that approach. It's just one perspective.
Yeah.
So having said all that, what do you think, Michael, in terms of like what would be your thought as to like where we should start in terms of people? Do we start with needs, or do you have a different approach?
I think another approach is starting with, I would say, and going back to the whole world topic, people represent the economy in terms of their activity, in terms of their the activity of fulfilling needs, right, solving problems, et cetera, et cetera. That's a very rudimentary, way of talking about the economy, which brings up, various forms of the economy, which we often talk about in terms of, say, the mode of production and reception. And I think within that framework, you can talk about needs, problems, et cetera, in a meaningful way where the telos of people, in a sense, is to revolutionize the economy or mode of production. Even though we may, by mode of production, we may mean something larger than what we typically mean by the economy, to include, say, society itself, right? So with that said, we can certainly go into the various needs, which will in turn become topics of their own, right? Unmet needs, or problems to be solved, while looking at it in a systematic way. For example, transitioning, right? Transforming the mode of production, going from an economy of hoarding, which we could say is sort of, it's one way of looking, it's a systematic way of looking at some of the root causes, right, of any number of problems, including inequality. And then from there, we can talk about, well, how if there's this economy of hoarding, how can we go from that reality to an economy of sharing, right, or a caring economy? So that's certainly one tack to take. But I think once that framework has been provided, in a sense, it doesn't really matter, where we begin, because we understand that what we're talking about is a part of something more systematic, society itself.
Yeah.
And then you get a good sense of how, say, for example, hunger, right? The problem of hunger, the unmet need of sustenance, food, nutrition, etc. That can in turn lead and historically has led to overpopulation, right? Which is a problem, and which increases inequalities and exacerbates all sorts of other problems. Because when we're talking about people, we're talking again at a very high level.
Yeah. No, you're hitting on some really important points. And the first thought that comes to mind is, I started off saying, hey, let's look at human needs. And when you talked about the economy and the imperative for revolution of the global economy and transformation of the economy from an economy of hoarding to an economy of sharing, what came to mind is this sort of bifurcation that's happened in the economy. Yes, certain parts of the economy are focused on meeting human needs, but so much of the global economy is about producing excess products and services for the wealthy, who have all their needs met, hundreds of times over, and yet are still acquiring newer, bigger yachts, newer, bigger palaces that they may only visit once a year, if even that. I mean, think of all the, palatial apartments in Manhattan, which sit vacant the vast majority of the time because they're owned by Russian oligarchs who are hanging out in Moscow. And
that's right.
They like to say that they've got,
or in the south of France.
Or the south of France. And, they like to say they've got a nice, a nice palatial apartment in Manhattan, but, that's what's important to them. It's to have it, not to utilize it. And the kind of tracing back to the roots of this illness, and, many people do look at it as an illness. I certainly do. The illness of hoarding, of excess hoarding. There's a really cool, movie, a 2-hour movie. It's sort of, I guess, in the genre of documentary, but it's really creative and really well done. And it's called I Am, and it's done by Tom Shadyac. And he, in that 2-hour documentary, there's a very few minute, 2 or 3 minute, like little cartoon animation, and it shows how at first societies, hunter-gatherer societies were very communal and everything was shared. The able-bodied men who could go out and hunt would go out and hunt and bring back the meat, and it was all shared by everyone. But then some of the hunters started to just take their meat that they had hunted and, hoarded it and stored it at the top of a mountain someplace, and then back home in the community, the elderly, the children, the sick, were suffering because they weren't getting, the sustenance that they needed. And the one of the things that's so broken about that situation is it takes a village to raise a child, and it takes a village to raise a hunter. So now that hunter is able-bodied and ready to go, hey, they owe all their capabilities and everything to the community, not just the whole community, but the whole world. And so I think there's this fundamental point of separation, where that in that myth, the hunter takes his spoils and goes and hoards them at the top of a mountain, and separates himself from the rest of the community. So I just wanted to point out that that the global economy has evolved or devolved in a way that it's in a very it's in a very sick mode. It's an illness. It's a mental illness. It's a spiritual illness, where we're rather than rather than being focused on the telos of a whole world, the global economy is focused on 7.3 billion separate teloses or teloi, which are the individual hoarding of each individual. And yes, entire economic theories, Adam Smith and so on, have been built around this notion that individual vices lead to public benefits. Well, because, when I buy this big yacht, of course, I'm helping to employ all these people in the yacht building industry and, all this stuff. And it's not like that's not a true statement. Those are statements that you can take, but as is well developed in the book Voltaire's Bastards by John Ralston Saul, you can use rationality, take a whole bunch of true statements and create something absolutely horrific. And I think that's ultimately what we've done with the global economy. We've created something absolutely horrific that is not at all focused on addressing the true needs of people on the planet, but that are focused on meeting the kind of the ego needs or the separation needs. I'm separate from the rest of the world, so therefore I need to hoard, and build up kind of my own little universe that I control, and it's all mine, right? Bill Gates is on his way to accumulating $100 billion in total wealth. He's now at 90 billion. He just added another 10 billion in less than a year.
Yeah, and yeah. So, yeah, I think it's important to take the long view insofar that when we're dealing with a series of different, modes of production, different forms of the economy, beginning with hunter-gatherers and then the, Neolithic revolution into an agrarian based economy, this sort of thing, right? You begin to see it's the beginnings of this sort of fragmentation, right? This and it's not all bad because specialization yields higher efficiency, and there's a number of great benefits to all that come out of it. That's true. Just like you said, you can, make any number of true statements, but then taken together, it can still be false, or it can still, not be, we're not necessarily being true to people, to the people, precisely because, yes, there are a lot of benefits to be derived from this kind of hoarding, and capitalism itself, in the very name, right, implies hoarding, because it's all about the accumulation of capital.
Right.
Right. And but then, the net result of that is, you have something akin to a foolish farmer who has this acre of land, and he takes his soil, and instead of spreading it evenly amongst the seeds, the crop, right, instead he just piles it high in one area while the rest of the field lies fallow, and it's an absurd situation. But essentially what's happening is, as capital does accumulate to the top, more and more people's basic needs are going unmet. And one way to put it is that one person's, or let's just say 100 persons needs go unfulfilled, right, at the expense of 100 people's unmet needs. You satisfy one person's wants, so that one person's wants turns out to trump 100 person's needs.
Exactly. And you and I both grew up, most of our growing up here in the United States, and in this country, we grew up very much in a culture that celebrated wants and the American dream. Go after all that you want. And, what about these people who have kind of fallen by the wayside and don't have enough of even their basic needs? And, the standard American answer that we were taught, coming of age in the Ronald Reagan era, was, hey, that's because they're not working hard enough. Let them work, and if they need to suffer a bit to kind of wake them up and get to work, so be it, right? But if we just give them stuff, if we just give them food and shelter, then we're going to interrupt that really important circuit of, hey, I have a need, it's unmet, I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, I'm cold, you know what, I better get to work. Great, you become part of the system, part of the economy. I mean, that's kind of the story that we were told that justifies all this hoarding. And it's actually, I mean, in the early mid 1980s, it was summed up in one very short phrase in the movie Wall Street, where Michael Douglas's character was saying, greed, for lack of a better word, is good. Greed is right. Greed, and of course, there's all this economic theory about how greed then drives all this economic activity and creates more jobs, and everybody wins. Except now in 2016, fast forward 30 years, and we're seeing that, no, it's actually been a dismal failure because we're destroying humanity, destroying the planet, and accelerating overpopulation with this polarization of wealth.
Yeah, and that makes me, that compels me to say that a lot of neoliberal economic theory is nothing more than bourgeois ideology, which from its inception is really a way to justify a certain set of behaviors that from an ethical point of view are unjust.
Absolutely. Yeah, and the way I look at it is, there are those who have embraced this game of capitalism and of hoarding, and who have accumulated a substantial amount of capital. Having accumulated it and having sort of won at the game of capitalism, they become that much more attached to the game of capitalism, right? They want that to be the great game because they've already won at it, right? People don't want to be, a prize fighter boxer who's just won the world championship and millions of dollars does not want to be told that boxing is a dumb sport and it's a damaging sport because you're just giving, people concussions and you're encouraging all this aggressive behavior in the audience and everything like that. Whatever. I'm saying a similar case can be made for capitalism. People who have won at the game of capitalism don't like being told that they were playing the wrong game. That's kind of like the ultimate insult to someone who's dedicated their lives to winning a certain game. They become very attached to that game.
Yeah, and this, and this form of ideology, in a sense, is a form of repression, because it's not that you are consciously, and in some cases you may be, but in most cases it's not that you're consciously aware that your justification, right, is a form of rationalization, that there's nothing just about it, that it doesn't represent justice in any meaningful sense of the word, but it's sort of a form of repression, in a sense, upon which you have built an entire sort of rationale for the way things are in the world. Well, I'm a realist, that's the way things are.
Yeah, or I'm a Keynesian economist, and this is just the way the economy works. I mean, I don't necessarily like all aspects of it.
But if I don't get mine, somebody else is going to get it, so it's sort of a sum-zero game in the minds of those who are fully engaged in that way. Now, that's of course making a straw man of any number of, say, money makers. We're painting a broad brushes here, but just kind of taking it, I think it's important, though, to paint a picture where you can actually see the difference between, say, an economy of hoarding, what that looks like, an economy of sharing. What's the alternative vision? Right. And so I think on this very high level of people, yes, there are any number of unmet needs, et cetera, but systematically, what is turning, the gears, who's benefiting? And if it were true, if trickle down economics, right, were quote unquote true, in the sense that really was the way the world works. See, people point and say, well, that's just the way the world works. Well, as it turns out, a lot of the things that we've been pointing to as examples of the way the world works haven't worked. So, for example, as we've pushed a sort of neoliberal a neoliberal agenda, right? Economically, the richer have gotten richer, and as we can see now, that wealth that we were seeing produced after the Second World War in the United States up through the Reagan era has been it's leveled off, and it's been in decline. And so some would say, well, that's because we need to restore the Reagan Revolution, right? Completely oblivious to the very forces that put him in power in the first place, and the inner contradictions of an economy of hoarding.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so the creation of wealth declines because, just like you said about the foolish farmer, the concentration of wealth is hampering and choking the entire system.
Yes.
And driving overpopulation, which in many ways is sort of like the root of many, if not most, of the world's problems. And the neoliberal economic theory combined with globalization, is just accelerating the concentration of wealth, poverty, overpopulation. I mean, it's like a mental illness at the level of the entire species of humanity. And it's
the antithesis of a whole world.
It's absolutely the antithesis of a whole world.
And so you're like, well, I'm just going to hold on to the part that I have, right? And so all of a sudden, instead of a community coming together, right, a village, so to speak, raising a child, you essentially erect walls, right, around you, so that you have this sort of modicum of security, because you feel threatened by the wider world. Look, the world is going to pot, and I must be doing the right thing because look at me, look at what I have, and it basically breaks up society into different classes, into different races, into this and that, so that you have all these institutionalized forms of inequality that are perpetuated by an economy of hoarding.
Yeah.
So you're going to say something?
Oh, no. I was just listening. Anyway, so we start. So the topic that we started off on is people and the needs of people. But what we're delving into is that the current mode of production of the global economy is fundamentally broken and inconsistent with a whole world. So what is needed is a revolution at the level of the global economy, at the level of the mode of production. And that is now it's becoming clear to me why you say revolution is the telos of people. Planet may have a different telos, the whole world has its telos, and of course, as you go further down the taxonomy, you'll get different teloses, or teloi, we think is the plural. But for people, the telos is revolutionizing the mode of production so that we get out of this insanely destructive death spiral that we're in with the economy of hoarding, turn the ship around and point it in a whole new direction, which is the telos of a whole world.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So go ahead. Mm-hmm.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, so the action at the level of people is precisely designing and implementing this revolution. And we talk about this in the topic of the Hungerless Games. It's sort of like a game to instigate this revolution. It's a game which gives structure to the revolution. But it's also a game which is different from revolutions of decades and centuries past. This is a completely non-violent revolution And it's a revolution not by creating and invoking military solutions, or even political solutions, but marketplace solutions, as you well scripted that I spoke in the Hungerless Games video. Marketplace solutions to market-based problems.
Yes. So I think whenever we're talking about people, this is what we're talking about, right? This is at least at the outset what we mean by this broad topic we're calling people. But again, as we pointed out in the whole the whole world video, you can't ultimately separate people from the planet.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think as we you're pointing out before, Jamin, that as we go deeper into people, right, the various needs and problems and so forth, what we're going to find is a lot of these are also ranged under planet. And so you have, the taxonomy isn't simply pointing in one direction.
Yeah. Yeah.
And also the taxonomy isn't, it's not like there's, one taxonomy to rule them all. That's not the point.
Right.
It's a tool.
Exactly.
And so I think here with this topic of people, we see that on a very high level, you just kind of get some clarification of, how people are sort of like the, sort of the pole. It's kind of like in this, what people is in the social world, planet is to, say, the natural world, but then in fact it's one world, right? It's a whole world.
Yeah.
And so I look forward to rooting down on the topic of the planet.
Very good. It was perfect timing because the cat walked across the screen just as you said that.
Yeah, but people love cat videos.
Yes. All right. So are we good on this first session on people?
I feel good about it.
Okay, wonderful. All right. Well, we'll see you on the next session of people, and also check out some of the other topics like planet and whatnot that we'll be exploring in parallel. All right. Well, thank you, Michael, and thank you all for watching. Arigato.
See you soon.
See you soon.